I am really looking forward to this session. We've got two fantastic joiners today, and I'm turning the tables a little bit because today's the day when we get to ask the questions to the journalists, which I am quite excited about. We're extremely fortunate to have Marcella Canova from journalism.co.uk. Almost like the I think you're like the editor of the editor of editors, really. It's like you're serving all the journalists, which is an interesting role. We'll get into that a little bit, I think. And together with Marcella, we've also got Rachel joining us, Rachel Wolfson, joining all the way from California, I think, who's in California today, I guess you're home. And so, Rachel writes for, I'm pretty sure some of you on today will be reading Rachel's work, because Rachel's writing for Cointelegraph and cryptonews.com, and so quite a lot of the things that we read, actually. So I think you may well know Rachel, and so thank you so much for joining me, both of you. I think maybe as a bit of context for everyone, I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves and a little bit about what you've been, sort of your experience, before I jump into my questions. So I'll start with you, Marcella. Maybe you can just give everybody a flavor for the sort of things that you've been working with over the years and your experience.
So hi everyone, and thank you, Wai, for having me at the conference. As you said, I'm editor at a business-to-business publisher, journalism.co.uk. We bring news about the sector to the media professionals, and I have been covering evolution and sort of innovation in technology that relates to the media sector for a number of years now.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Yes, yeah, thanks again for having me. It's so wonderful to be here. And yes, I am joining from San Francisco, California. So it's early for me, but excited to be here. I have been covering the blockchain space since 2017. I got my start writing for Bitcoin Magazine. I've written for publications like Forbes, Huffington Post, but currently I'm with Cointelegraph and cryptonews.com. I also have a podcast called Web3 Deep Dive Podcast. Paul Brody has been on the podcast, so I hope everybody has seen that episode. And yeah, I love covering the blockchain sector. I think it's interesting and it's evolving, and it's something that I enjoy writing about.
Thank you. And so today's session, what the way that we've framed it is that we really want to think about redefining trust in a digital media era, right? So I'm going to jump right in with that first question. And the first question for both of you, and I'll start with you, Marcella, is it a thing? Do we need to redefine trust? Is there an issue with trust in this space?
Well, there is a massive issue with trust, and I don't think that necessarily new. People were always doubting official information, sometimes for very good reasons. But I think now one of the main problems we are having is obviously with the explosion of generative AI. It makes it's much faster and cheaper to produce misleading content, and audiences arrive to a point where they make confusion between skepticism and cynicism. So it's not just, is what I'm saying true? Is almost disengaging from anything that does not come from a bias or doesn't come from a source that they decided to trust, and just being not just suspicious, but downright sort of negative, and just say, oh, well, this must be fake because that's not what I recognize. And as a media, we have a massive challenge to show not just what to say, because that era of, I am a publisher, therefore what I'm saying is true, trust me, I'm a journalist, that era is over. People are much more savvy about misinformation. I think now the challenge is that we need to show much more how we work and why people should trust them. What is the origin of the information, how we gather news, and especially when you go to very sensitive topics like Israel-Hamas war, or organized crime, or public sector corruption or something like that, demonstrating how we gather data and how we gather evidence is an absolute cornerstone on trust, because what we are asking people is to fundamentally reassess their deepest beliefs, and that's hard.
Yeah. I saw you nodding, Rachel. Jump in. Is it resonant? You were like, yes. So tell me, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think ensuring trust in the media is definitely a challenge, and it's something that needs to be solved today because, like Marcella was saying, with AI, fake news can easily be generated, fake images can easily be generated. But I think that all of these challenges are definitely solvable using blockchain technology. So very early on, maybe it was like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a project that I learned about doing this when the Ukraine war started. Basically, fake images were being generated of what was happening there. But there was a project taking real evidence and real images of what was going on in the region and putting that on a blockchain network. So people could see that that was actually proof of what was happening there versus these AI generated images. So I think that, there are a lot of challenges with ensuring trust in the media, but I do think that they are solvable through blockchain technology for sure. I think that that's a great use case for blockchain.
Yeah, we would certainly agree with you. I mean, it's something that we do. But I know, and I've got to ask you this question, Marcella, because I know that you've got a nuanced view to that, right?
Definitely, and I'm one of the maybe more skeptical adopters or sort of observer of use of blockchain technology. And as far as I can see, every tech solves one problem and creates another. Something like being able to establish provenance of an image is a fantastic asset for fact checkers. But I have not yet seen a tool that would be user friendly to a point that a sort of random consumer could use it. If you try to explain things like blockchain or provenance to just person in the street, people have no idea what to talk about, and those tools just are not user friendly for anyone who is not kind of deeply in the fact checking space or some sort of training in establishing origin of information. My worry with something like a tool that can sort of lock in an image or any piece of information, text or video, in this sort of decentralized internet where no one can remove it, is that there is a massive potential for even bigger dissemination of misinformation if that bad actors can use this technology as well as the good actors, and is a massive potential for slander or campaigns that seek to discredit public figures. And I just can't see any way nowadays where people can defend themselves if there is some sort of massive wide campaign aimed at discrediting them. Even if you sue, I don't know, if a publisher publishes an article that is untrue, you can sue them for libel, and they have to delete the content or just take it over the internet. Yeah. If this content is published on decentralized nodes, you can win every single libel case in every country, everywhere. You will never be able to remove that content, and that is a massive problem.
I think it's fair to say that the technology in and of itself isn't a panacea, right? It's not going to be it's not going to fit all answers. But I also feel that if you look at the internet today and platforms today that are absolutely not blockchain enabled, and don't have the benefits of blockchain to them, you could still find cases where information is difficult to remove and to walk away from. I think that is part of the digital media space. And so I think you have to look at it through a lens of looking at if the tooling isn't the panacea, and I don't know that it ever is in any scenario that the technology is always the answer. It's what do you need around it? What would you need to sort of to safeguard it? And I'm going to pose that question to you, maybe Rachel, coming at it from where you are and when you've thought about blockchain in the context of how it can help. What are the yes ands that it needs to have with it? What would you need to have in place to go with it for it to be successful?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I want to say that with the rise of AI, I do think blockchain is going to be one of the best technologies to ensure that information is accurate. I mean, we're going to see a ton of fake news. We're already seeing it generated, especially this year with the elections. Um, so I do think that blockchain is going to really help solve that problem. Now, yes, I agree with Marcella. It's not user-friendly. Consumers, they hear blockchain, they get freaked out. They think about cryptocurrency and fraud and all of these problems. So while I do think blockchain can solve that problem, I do think that we need more education around how it can solve the problem, around how it can be applied with the use of other technologies. So maybe blockchain alone isn't the answer completely. Maybe AI can also help and we can combine the two technologies. I think that regulations need to be in place that say, hey, it's okay to use blockchain technology. Right now in places like the United States, it's very difficult to even to mention blockchain because people get freaked out. So I think education, regulatory friendly environments, how it can be applied with other technologies is really important because, like I said, these use cases have been proven to be successful early on. You can prove that information is true and accurate when you take that data and put it on a blockchain network, at least when it comes to images. If I was to write an article, for instance, and we took that article and placed it on a blockchain network and said, hey, Rachel Wolfson wrote this article. If it was copy and pasted by another journalist or another source, I could say, well, actually, that information is on this blockchain network. It's mine. But I do think we need better education, regulations, and a lot of things before we get to this point where we'll see mainstream adoption.
Okay, I think that's fair. It's been a little bit of a theme the whole of the last couple of days. This subject it doesn't necessarily matter what the use case is that having the guardrails in place is going to be important, right? But if I was to ask the question in a different way, because we've already mentioned several stakeholders, right? There's you as a journalist creating content. Could be a photographer, could be a writer, could be a musician, right? You're creating content. As the content creator, as the editor or the buyer and distributor of that content, is it the consumer of the content? When it comes to rebuilding trust, who's going to be responsible for that? Who is responsible for in the food chain to solving the problem?
Well, I think it has to be, for the media at least, it has to be a collaboration between the media sector, the tech sector, and the regulator and the general public. I don't think you can leave any of these components out if trust is what we are trying to rebuild. I don't know how this translates to US context, but we in the UK, we have what we call public consultations, where sort of cross-party committee will set out to have consultation with public. So these are done as sort of town squares or surveys and really try to understand what is the need from the point of view of the public, and then kind of work backwards with, say, the media, representatives of the media and representatives of tech companies to create regulation. Now, I approach regulation from the point of view of harm. What we are trying to, if we don't regulate, who will be harmed, how they will be harmed, and is harm bigger than the benefit of not regulating? And I think the main benefit of regulation is that it creates environment where it is safe to experiment. And I think loads of media organizations are hesitant to enter this space because reputational risk is very high. The investment is obviously, substantial. And if there are no clear rules, and if the risk is perceived to be bigger than the benefits, then that innovation is not going to happen. And this whole rebuilding trust with public is not going to happen. So regulation is crucial.
I think it's a good way to frame it, is thinking a little bit about the context of the purpose being is really around protection and making sure that you're protecting consumers or those that can be harmed in the process, which is actually, again, there's multiple people that could fall into that that category, I think. Rachel, what are your thoughts on this? Is regulation key in this space, or what do you see happening? Do you see much movement in that sort of that would make you feel that the regulation is going to be there? Because digital media has been around for quite a while now. So where are we on that?
Yeah, I think regulations are important. And I think once we have clear guidelines on how, media companies can leverage blockchain technology and AI for their own protocols, I think, we'll start to see improvements for sure. But in the meantime, I think that it's the responsibility of those media companies and especially of the journalists involved to do their work correctly. So, for instance, with covering the blockchain and cryptocurrency sector, you come across all different types of stories. You come across, there was coverage with FTX by the New York Times that was praising SBF, right? So you come across these stories in this industry that you've got to be very wary and very careful of. And so it's really the responsibility of the media publications and of the journalists to do their work correctly, to dig, to do the research, to make sure that the stories that they're publishing are accurate. Right now, we're not using blockchain technology to say that this information was written by this person, it's true and accurate. So we've got to do our job and really dig in there to make sure what the content that we're producing is trustworthy. And that involves more than just seeing a press release from a PR firm and rewriting it and publishing that. Because a lot of the times those press releases, they're not newsworthy, first of all, and they just don't contain the information that people need to know about, I guess. So what I like to do is I like to call people on the phone. I like to talk to them in person. I like to really dig deeper to get the information before I write stories. Now, the problem with that also is like sometimes you have a deadline, right? If I have to do 2 articles a week, it's very difficult for me to actually fully dig deep enough to ensure everything is what I want it to be. But I do think that we're getting there. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's speed matters, and everything's moving very, very quickly. And I also get it. I kind of want to touch back as well on the comment about usability, because I feel that the responsibility for that has got to be on people like us building product, right? And it's not just our problem, but anybody. And the consumability or the ease of use is something that shouldn't prohibit a technology from being harnessed, in my view. It's something that we need to take into account. And I do think that there's a lot of progress there. And I would contend that I don't know that you have to understand the intricate sort of workings of how the technology is working to be able to get the value out of having an authenticated certified stamp and something to be tokenized. I think that you can do that. And we're already seeing in some of the other products that we're using, is that making that consumable and making it easy to use so that a consumer can actually pick up a product that they've bought and they can scan the QR code and they can see already that authentication in the background, or it can be other information when we're looking at tokenization, right? You can include all sorts of use cases in that. But I do think that that's something that the onus is on us to make it easy to use and understandable. I think you're always going to have the question with the technology is, even if it's consumable and it's easy to use, there has to be a level of trust in the way that the data is and the standardization, and that's where it requires, I think, this sense of regulation, which I think you're quite right. This matters to all of us, and so having the consumer, or having the voice of the consumer taken into account, the same as having the voice of the journalist taken into account in the process, is going to be very important to get it right. But technically, it's there. So this is where I think we need to start to sort of look for who in the supply chain can actually start to action and put some of these things in place. And we have examples. We do have examples of others. I think I'm sure maybe Rachel, you've seen examples as well where blockchain is being used certainly in some jurisdictions for this type of information.
Right. Well, I know that Ernst & Young is doing something with, is it ANSA in Rome, the news publication? I've covered that story and I found it fascinating. And so I think that use cases like this will help mainstream adoption move forward. I mean, we're starting off slow, but I think if some publications start adopting the technology and implementing it and showing that it can be useful, other publications will want to do the same. So I really like that use case with ANSA. I know that everybody can read about it on, what I wrote about it and also on the Ernst & Young website. So I think that's great. Another really good example that I think will help mainstream adoption for using blockchain within journalism is how blockchain is being used today for goods and products to trace them. So like in the fashion industry now, we're seeing a lot of major brands, including NFC chips and scannable codes, where people can scan that information and see where their goods and products actually came from to see if those products are legitimate. And I think that, those use cases will help people realize that the same thing can be applied to journalism.
And no, I agree. It's just understanding and knowledge, and it's also the maturity. It's the maturity of the technology is getting to a point now where there's more people that know it. There's more people that have used it and feel familiar with it. And so I don't know that it's going to be the hurdle, but there's still a lot of work to be done in this space. I'm just going to check. Do we have some questions coming in, or I don't? My screen isn't up, so I can't tell you at the moment. So I'm going to ask you my questions. I think that when you're looking at some of the challenges in this space and where you are today, and I think there was something that I think that we touched on in an earlier conversation, Rachel, which I think is a really important factor here to think about, and that is that as you're creating content, it's intrinsically built into the process of content creation that where you get your information from, how you source that information, and the tools that are available for you to validate that information sort of becomes baked in to the quality of what you're producing and your own confidence in what you're putting out there. And so as you're spinning around a story and you have to do 2 a week or 3 a week and there's speed there, you are going to gravitate towards sources of information that you know are going to be credible. So as you're looking for credibility and you're making those sometimes very quick decisions about, do I believe this source or do I not believe this source? Is it a credible source? Is it not a credible source? How does that process look like? Because there must be, in some ways, it's experience, but also, I mean, how does it work as a creator when you're looking at that and you're making those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fortunately, I've been in the industry for a very long time, and I've managed to build up relationships with thought leaders and people that I trust in the industry and that have been in the industry for as long as I've been in or even longer. And so I think that I'm very fortunate when I write stories, I can literally reach out to those contacts because I know them, because I've built those relationships. But it is extremely difficult when you're writing feature articles, 2 to 3 of those a week, to find the right people on a whim. It's like, you've got a deadline, you've got to do this fast. So I think it really helps when you already have those contacts built up, because it's better than just going, I go to Twitter a lot or to X a lot to get sources, but a lot of the times I also reach out to people that I know. I mean, I've interviewed Paul a number of times just because I trust him, I trust EY, so.
Yeah, you go back again. And I can only imagine for you, Marcella, it must be part of the model, because your clients are journalists, right? So you have an intrinsic role in in that space. So how do you do it? What's your process?
Yeah, journalists are a tough crowd, I can tell you that. And any mistake gets spotted within seconds, and they are not kind, letting you know. So yeah, we have extra motivation to keep accurate. But I think, going forward, there is no scarcity of content. There is oversupply of content, and I don't think content is what makes difference. Where publishers will find the premium, where consumers are willing to pay for news, is accuracy and trust, because there's one thing that cannot be replaced by any technology. And people will, always want and be willing to pay for information they need, and then they can trust. So for us, verification, as Rachel said, is definitely, building trust. I do sense check stories with network. I also ask for evidence. There's someone say, I don't know, our Spotify numbers tripled. I was like, cool, can you can you send me your log of your Spotify stats? And we have to do these things as journalists, because we got to a point where there is such pressure to produce more content that something like press releases have replaced journalists' role, which is literally fact check stories. And our role is not to write stuff. Our role is to find out the best obtainable version of the truth. And that is, I don't want to be pessimistic, but that seems to be disappearing from journalism. And I think people, especially editors, have to wake up to the reality that content is not what's going to make difference. Trust is what's going to make difference. And that has to be an absolute focus of every newsroom.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's an incredibly important point for this session, but also for everybody to start to internalize, and for all content. Actually, it's as important, and for the integrity of the brand of any company. Actually, any closing thoughts from you, Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to say that, with the rise of AI, I think that's what we really need to focus on now, with using blockchain to combat that misinformation, but also AI. Yes, like, people say, oh, are you concerned that you're going to lose your job because AI will replace you? The thing is, if you're a good journalist, whatever it is that you write, if you do the due diligence, the research, and you're good at what you do, AI will not take your job, because the information that AI is producing, that could very, very, very well be fake, not user-friendly to consume. It may sound weird when you read it. So I think that that's really what we need to focus on now, is like AI, the challenges, and tell the world, like, no, it will not replace people that do their job really well. It may be helpful in some regards, but those are my final thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been fantastic to get to know you both, and it's been really fun to talk to you this afternoon and get your points of view. So thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of the day to you, Rachel, and thank you, and enjoy your evening, Marcella. And really, I'm definitely all in on this. We're ready to help any way we can, and I fully understand we're certainly not the whole solution, but we're certainly happy to help you any way that we can. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.